Ryan McBeth is a U.S. Army veteran and OSINT analyst. Welcome to our program, Ryan.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Ukraine has successfully struck Russia's Caspian fleet, more than 1,000 kilometers deep inside Russian lines. Several ships have been hit by the strike. What is your reaction to this development? Because Ukraine strikes back against all the odds.
It's really impressive how Ukraine has developed technologies, specifically surface drone technologies, unmanned surface drone technologies, unmanned air drone technologies, totally homegrown that are able to strike Russia from far behind enemy lines. And they've developed these capabilities just within the past 2 years. My God, it's almost 3 years. Almost 3 years. Over 2.5 years, Ukraine's been fighting. And they've developed these technologies from scratch. And this just kind of shows that the Ukrainian people, these are the same people that were pouring gasoline into beer bottles and leaving them in milk crates at bus stations with instructions saying, hey, throw this at this part of the tank. It kind of shows that these are people who are not going to be defeated.
Also, North Korean soldiers engaged in a combat in the Kursk region for the first time, according to Reuters. They were under Ukrainian fire for the first time, according to the Ukrainian military intelligence. What do you make of it?
Well, I can tell you that sooner or later we're going to start seeing people on the ground. And I can tell you that one thing that North Korea has that Russia wants is soldiers. And when you have a situation where for the first time ever, essentially, North Korea has something that Russia wants and can trade for. So with a deal like this, Russia gets soldiers in the form of North Koreans, and North Korea gets things like arms technology, weapons technology, satellite technology that they can't really grow at home. I don't believe President Putin cares about North Korea one bit, but he needs soldiers, and this is a way of getting soldiers. As to whether or not these soldiers are performing well, that remains to be seen. From what I understand, there have been situations where some of these soldiers have fired on Russians accidentally. So it doesn't seem like they are the quality type of special forces that we thought were actually going to be sent to the front lines.
Also, there have been, you just mentioned about the special operations, special forces. Yeah. There have been lots of reports that they are in their 20s, young people. And how can we even call them special forces if they haven't been in combat, haven't participated in major overseas operations for a while, for this time?
Well, to them, special forces might not be like the American special forces who do counterterrorism, or they parachute into a village and they help the villagers establish a militia. That's kind of what American special forces do. I think these North Korean special forces might be more like shock troops, and so they're better funded, better trained, and better fed. So that's kind of what they might mean by special forces, in the sense they are special in the sense that they're not performing agricultural duty like every other unit in North Korea. So that might be their rationale for special forces. These might be people in their 20s, but perhaps they are people who are from high-ranking families in the regime, who they know these kids are going to be treated better. And so they just have a different definition as to what special forces are.
Also, it seems like Vladimir Putin tries to be cautious because he has not yet deployed North Korean troops to Ukraine, to the Ukrainian territory. They are engaged in combat in the Kursk region of Russia. What could this indicate?
Well, that could indicate that what President Putin doesn't want is any kind of situation where North Korean troops have a higher than average chance of being captured by Ukraine and then being debriefed. by a South Korean soldier. I would not be surprised at all if South Korea has translator interpreters or interrogators, I should say, in Ukraine as of this moment, just in case they do capture someone, because South Korea would love intel on how the current disposition of the North Korean army. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are there. So it could be that they don't want. It could be that Russia doesn't have enough troops to actually take Kursk back. It could also be that they don't want the North Koreans anywhere near the south, where theoretically they could be captured in operations against Ukraine. Or it could be a simple situation in the sense that it was just the easiest place to move them, or the place that had the most need for troops. So it's one of those three things, and most likely number three, just a simple situation of we need troops here. Let's plug these blocks in here and tell them to go straight forward. There should be a lull in frontline fighting fairly soon. We are getting close to the winter, so they might not be of much use in the south quite yet, but they might be of use in Kursk, where Russia's had trouble taking that particular area back.
How do you see the outcome of this cooperation between Russia and North Korea? Do you think that Kim Jong-un could continue this deployment of even more soldiers to Russia and Ukraine? And what are the risks for Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un just continuing to conducting this deployment, to getting more human resources?
Well, I certainly think that North Korea might continue to do this as long as it's advantageous for them to send troops. Advantageous meaning, they get oil from Russia, or they get cheap oil, they get weapon technology, they get satellite technology. As long as that deal is still in place, I think North Korea has an army the size of 1.4 million people. It's a lot of people to kind of push over into the Western Front. So that's kind of number one. And the second question are, what are the consequences? And I can tell you that one of the consequences you might actually see is you could see a country like South Korea getting involved, to the extent where they either send troops or weapon systems. And that's not necessarily something Russia wants. So it actually could make the fight against Ukraine harder if other nations get involved on Ukraine's side, where they're either sending troops or more weapons. So this is a calculated risk. I think it might show that Russia really has some cracks developing in its recruitment program. Because don't forget, for the longest time, Russia had a deal with their elites: do whatever you want, but don't touch our kids. And the second you have a general mobilization where children, teenagers from St. Petersburg and Moscow, from the elites, are getting drafted, that's how you start revolutions, right? So that could be the ultimate consequence if Russia doesn't use these North Korean troops.
How should the West respond to this escalation from your perspective? Because we haven't seen any kind of response yet. What is your take on that?
How should the U.S. respond to this?
Sure.
Well, ideally, the U.S. should give as many weapon systems and platforms as Ukraine can possibly take down that railway from Poland. That would be ideal. We should also, I can say a number of things of how the U.S. should respond. We should respond by putting U.S.-operated missile batteries inside of Ukraine that are manned by U.S. soldiers. We should establish a no-fly zone. There's a lot of things we should do. But one of the safest things we could do is pump even more weapon systems down that railway. And I know that Poland and France have talked about actually sending troops to set up blocking positions or perform logistical functions. Look, the United States is going to get involved in this war sooner or later. And right now, 2 years ago, we were in 1939. Right now, it's 1941. I know for Europe, the World War II started in 1939. But for Americans, it started in 1941. We're in 1941 right now. We're going to get involved sooner or later. and we might as well get involved on our terms as opposed to when those terms are forced upon us.
Do you mean that the US could be involved in this war despite what would happen in Ukraine? Like the 100% they would be involved today or tomorrow or in the future, because that's what we have right now?
I think it is almost certainly likely that not the US, but NATO will get involved, because sooner or later, Russia will launch a missile toward Lviv that accidentally veers into Poland and then smacks into a daycare center. And I think the only reason U.S. troops are in Poland right now is to prevent the Poles from just taking matters into their own hands and going into Ukraine and helping. Sooner or later, that's going to happen. Sooner or later, an errant missile is going to smash into a daycare center in Poland. Or sooner or later, some of these Russian sabotage efforts will actually destroy a plane in flight, which is something that I believe was Germany that caught Russians trying to plant bombs on aircraft. Sooner or later, that's going to happen. Or Russia will they'll sabotage a factory and some people will get killed. Or they'll launch a cyber attack and a hospital will be affected and people will die because the generators couldn't turn on and they were on a ventilator. So sooner or later, NATO is going to get involved, and we should probably get involved on our own terms as opposed to when those terms are thrust upon us.
We also had interesting discussion with Sean Bell, retired Air Vice Marshal of the Royal Air Force. He also said that a no-fly zone in Ukraine imposed by NATO would be devastating for Russian war effort and for Russia. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. There are risks to it. And I think about 2.5 years ago, I was saying we can't just establish a no-fly zone. A lot of people were saying, why don't you just establish a no-fly zone? It's very easy to say, why don't you just, when you don't actually have to implement that. But it's been about 2.5 years. We've seen Russia's capability. We know a lot more about Russia's capability. Russia has also attrited their aircraft, and we've seen attrition in their air defenses. So I think it would be safer to establish a no-fly zone by NATO. And something like that, I could easily see Russia deciding not to push that or to try to force that no-fly zone, mainly because Russia has very limited aircraft right now. Their aircraft production isn't what it could be. I think they're producing maybe 25 to 50 aircraft a year, if that. So they can't afford to have any aircraft shot down. And when you're going up against probably one of the largest and most technically advanced coalitions of aircraft in the world, it might just be easier to keep your aircraft on the ground, kind of like what Saddam Hussein did when he found out about American air power, about coalition air power. So yes, I could see a no-fly zone being extremely effective if one were implemented by NATO.
Like also to cover with you the US general election, Donald Trump beats Kamala Harris. Also, Republicans gained majority in Senate and could gain in another majority in the House of Representatives. What is your take on the result of this election? Are you shocked?
No, not particularly. What's interesting is that in America we essentially have two parties, and the Democratic Party is the party that just lost the White House. The Republican Party kind of came in, and for the longest time, the Democratic Party has been kind of focused on the elites of the country, and they've kind of lost sight of the average person who is worried about economics. Just the price of gasoline, the price of food. And yet you have Democrats saying, hey, the economy is fine, the economy is fine. And that might be because it's fine to them. But to the average American who is shopping at Dollar Tree and who has to get their kids to school every day, it's not fine. And I'm currently in a place called Burlingame, California, which is right outside of San Francisco. Burlingame is probably the wealthiest city in the country per capita, like by the number of citizens. There is an Apple store in Burlingame. And normally, to show how important that is, there are 6 Apple stores in all of New York City, which caters to 8 million or so people. And there's one Apple store in Burlingame, which is a small town. And that kind of shows you the amount of money in that town. The people in Burlingame were probably really surprised by the election results, but every other American who doesn't live in a very wealthy city probably wasn't surprised at all.
There are lots of discussions about the Trump's peace initiative regarding Ukraine. A Wall Street Journal reported that some Trump's advisors propose freezing the conflict, to freeze the conflict, to create a demilitarized zone and just to let all the casualties, just to let the war to stop, just to stop this war. Also, according to some people behind near Trump, European forces could be deployed to Ukraine to just check the implementation of this peace treaty. And my first question is, do you believe that it would be so easy for Trump just to call Vladimir Putin and end the war in 24 hours?
No, I don't. I don't. And it's for a couple of reasons. The first is that Vladimir Putin needs war. He needs war to stay in power. He has to have his nation in perpetual war in order to stay in power. As soon as they stop producing military components, the wheels come off the Russian economy, essentially. And that's going to be really, really bad for Russia. So Russia has to stay in a state of perpetual war, perpetual mobilization. So I don't really see Russia agreeing to any kind of peace deal no matter what. So I know that when it comes to President Trump, his biggest fear isn't Russia, it's China. And I have said this before, that China is watching what's going on in Ukraine. And if we can't support a country that has a rail line to Poland, we're not going to support a country like Taiwan that is 6,100 miles, or I guess about 10,000 kilometers away from everything but China. There is the tyranny of distance in the Pacific, where you need to be able to move supplies from the United States or from England, France, UK, Canada, Australia, all of the nations that are part of the coalition to defend Taiwan. You have to move all those supplies all the way to Taiwan. So China is watching what's going on in Ukraine, and they're going to make a decision to invade Taiwan in 2027 or 2028 based on how we treat Ukraine. So I could easily see President Trump calling for some kind of ceasefire and then shoveling as many weapons into Ukraine as humanly possible. We call that the porcupine theory, to turn Ukraine into this armed camp that Russia couldn't dare invade again. But I don't see it as easy as President Trump calling President Putin and saying, hey, you need to stop the war right now, and we're going to have peace. We're going to have peacekeepers inside the current demilitarized zone. I don't think it's going to be that easy.
Sure, and main question is, what would happen after Vladimir Putin say, no, I will not do that?
Yeah. Well, once he says that, look, President Trump is a very vengeful man. And people talk about deals. So he likes to make a deal. He's like, I'm going to make a deal. I'm going to make a deal between Ukraine and Russia. And I could easily see this turning into a deal of, oh, there's no deal? Okay, Ukraine, here's a bunch of weapons. Here's a bunch of attack hams. You're now allowed to attack inside of Russia with these weapon systems. Do we have a deal yet? No? Okay. England, UK, France, you're allowed to, Ukraine is now allowed to fire Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. Do we have a deal yet? And just let's keep pumping more weapons into Ukraine until we have a deal. Don't forget, President Trump is his own person, and he can be very vengeful. He does not forget. And if someone doesn't react positively to what he perceives as his kindness, then you do not want to be on his bad side. And if President Putin ends up on his bad side, President Putin might certainly end up on the bad side of a Storm Shadow missile.
So do you expect this kind of a positive scenario in which Trump provides Ukraine with security assistance until both sides can conduct negotiations in good faith, can reach a normal deal, on appropriate terms for Ukraine?
I think it's certainly possible. And I say that because he did it before. When President Obama sent blankets and night vision goggles, it was President Trump that sent Javelin missiles, right? No better friend, no worse enemy. If you choose to be a friend of the United States, we're going to back you. But if you choose to turn against the United States, you're going to have a big problem in the form of a Javelin missile. So I could easily see a situation where if President Trump feels like he wasn't given the respect that he was due, you have trainloads full of missiles coming into Ukraine through Poland.
Also, it seems like Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that they will move forward with their war effort and will pursue their goals, regardless of who will be in power in the White House.
Yeah.
Also, the spokesperson of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, Dmitry Peskov, said that the war cannot be stopped by Donald Trump. And do you see this as an indication that Russian side would not like to negotiate without any kind of pressure on them?
Well, Russia hasn't completed its objectives yet, so I don't see how the war could stop, because Russia needs to take all of Ukraine and turn it into a client state, kind of like Belarus. After Ukraine, they have to take the Baltics. After the Baltics, they have to take Poland, and that takes Russia's border with the West down from I think 1,600 miles down to 200 miles. You'd have to convert that into kilometers. But the whole idea here is that they have to take over certain countries in the West or turn them into client states because they want that buffer zone. And I can also see, now that I think of it, Russia is going to attack on its own terms, but it's going to be a lot harder to do that without things like Iranian weapons. And one of the things that President Trump does not like is Iran's attitude toward the United States. And I could easily see him being very more stern with Iran than the current president was, and taking out certain Iranian sites that are supplying weapon systems to Russia. Now, that, with the Shahed drone, that's not going to work because Russia is building their own Shahed drone. But there's missile systems that Iran has been giving to Russia. So I could easily see President Trump putting that on the target list, just as a way to prevent Iran from getting that hard currency or oil from Russia, just to starve Iran even more of hard currency that they need for their economy to work. So even if Russia wants to continue its war of aggression, they're going to have to do it perhaps without Iranian help.
And my last question for you would be regarding this topic we have already discussed regarding Donald Trump. How do you see who can be involved in his team? Who could be with him in the White House? Do you have any insights, ideas about who could be those people advising Donald Trump on Ukraine?
Well, one of those people, I'm not that into the political side of things, but I know one of those people could be Mike Pompeo. And Mike Pompeo is he is very aware of Russia's status as a state that produces disinformation. He's actually on the board of Cyabra, which is a disinformation detection company that I've done work with before. So if Mike Pompeo is in Trump's cabinet in any sort of capacity, he's certainly going to be a voice of reason and a supporter of Ukraine, mainly because he knows how important it is to make sure that Ukraine gets the weapons that it needs. It's always good to support a democracy, especially a budding democracy like Ukraine. And by supporting them, we also show China our kind of resolve. So we kind of get 2 for 1 here. And what does a businessman like? A businessman likes a deal. So if you can get 2 for 1, why not?
Thank you, Ryan, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
And thank you so much for inviting me on.